Recently, we've seen a resurgence in book challenges, mostly taking place through school boards intent on removing certain materials from their curriculum. Where is this happening? Why now? And should we be concerned? Hi, I'm Kellee Forkenbrock, Public Services Librarian for North Liberty Library, and joining me here today is my colleague, Erin Silva, our Youth and Teen Services Librarian, to talk about book challenges and how it is impacting schools and libraries all across the nation. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, Kellee.
Nice to see you again. Too. So I think the first question we have is, what is the difference between book banning and book challenging? And also, is removing a book being taught in a classroom really censorship if it's available elsewhere?
Good question. So book banning would be the all-out removal of a book and its contents and taking it away either under a process that is set up by the school board or within the a library policy for a request for removal. A challenge is when the parent or concerned citizen brings a book to a school board or library board's attention and starts that process. So there are a lot of books that are challenged throughout a year or a school year. Not all of those books are banned. So they have to go through the process in order to get something removed off of a shelf. And removing a book from a school is censorship. And the reason why is because the Supreme Court in 1982, the only time the Supreme Court has ever judged or had a ruling on a book ban, started in 1982 with, it's called Pico versus the Island Tree School District in the state of New York. And the school board just decided unilaterally to pull some books off of the library shelves because they did not agree with the content of these books. And that was seen as censorship. And the Supreme Court ruling says that school officials may not remove books from a school library simply because they dislike the ideas in the book. And it gets a little more nuanced after that. There was another case in 1995 called Case versus USD 233, and a book was had been on the shelves for 10 years. The superintendent decided to pull the book from the library shelves all on his own, bypassing the process that had already been set up within the school library to reconsider materials. And that case went to the state court, and the court ruled with the student who started the challenge to that decision. And then it was also decided that the board had removed the book because of its content and not because of literary merit or contemporary community standards.
I see. Yes. Now, another question I have here, we're both parents.
Yes.
We both have children.
Yes.
And as we know, there are a great deal of things that children are withheld from until they're a certain age due to lack of life experience and just the general impressionability of the youth. Aren't there books that potentially are inappropriate for children? And if there are, how do we draw the line between what is appropriate and what's not?
Yeah, so that's a hard question. When it comes to the children, and as a parent, yes, 100% there are things that I did not want my child exposed to when they were younger, and I wanted control over those things. There is parental responsibility, and I think what happens is parents can become complacent in thinking that all things are good for all kids if they are in a public library or if they're in a school library. And it's the responsibility of the parent to really look at the materials that their kids are bringing home or want to check out It's not hard to do because,
Right.
books are free at the
Yeah.
library. You can just go and you can thumb through and you can see if you think it's appropriate for your child. The problem comes in when, like, myself as a parent would try to maybe control what you, Kellee, as a parent, let your child read or look at or listen to. I think there's many of us parents who were alive when the parental advisory stickers started to become a thing on albums. I mean, definitely made you want to go out and buy that album because you wanted to hear what was going on in there. It's the same thing with books. I think parents, they come from the right place, which is, oh my gosh, I don't want my child to have access to X book because it has X things in it that I don't agree with. And that's fine. Like, you should absolutely have the conversation with your own child. The problem is when you decide that nobody's child can have access to that book. And that's where, libraries especially, we exist to provide all kinds of materials to everybody, whether or not we agree with maybe what's in the book. And I think that it's a fine line with, I did not want my child reading Stephen King when he was 10 because I felt like, there's horror and I don't want him to be afraid or, turn into a deviant for reading horror books at too young of an age. Those things did not happen. But it allowed me to have a conversation with him that maybe I wasn't quite ready to have because, as parents, we think of our children as being these innocent little creatures and we don't want to
corrupt them.
Yes, thank you. But if say Stephen King were not in the library for him to access, that would take away that opportunity for me to have that conversation with my child. And it's scary to have those conversations sometimes if you're not sure about where your kids are with their knowledge of sex or, LGBTQ issues or social justice. Those conversations are hard, but I think also books are a way to start those conversations in a non-threatening way.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Now, is this issue treading on the First Amendment? We hear that a lot, not only in topics of book challenges and book bans, but even when it comes to the mask mandate and, gun control. Is this treading on the First Amendment, or does it fall into the gray area of potential limitations? Similar to not being allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater without negative consequence, meaning that no rule is absolute, so some books should be up for periodic review. So having that set up, how does this impact the First Amendment in your thoughts?
I believe, and I think there's probably law out there that you can find that, yes, it is a First Amendment issue because you would be restricting access to information. And freedom of speech is protected, and also inherently in that the opposite of true is true, where if we have the freedom to say what we want to say, we also have the freedom to hear or to read or to receive that information, and restricting that goes against the First Amendment.
Absolutely. Do you think that we have any specific laws or legislation in place here in Iowa that would either help or hinder the process of banning books?
So there is the Iowa Obscenity Law. It is Rule 728, and you can just Google that and it'll pop right up. And that has to do with all things obscenity. And that is... It is something that is brought up a lot. Some of the state representatives have mentioned that they might want to be going after teachers and librarians who disseminate obscene material. And so yes, it can bolster an argument for removing something, but it can also protect the freedom of access to I'm putting obscene material in quotes because what happens with a lot of these challenges is a parent or a community member will take one sentence or a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs or a page out of context and read it out loud for dramatic effect and to say, see, there's curse words, there's sex in here, this is not okay for our kids. But what they don't do is they don't look at the work as a whole. And that's where the obscene material rule really comes into place, because it talks about contemporary community standards, but the material as a whole has to be looked at. So you cannot pick and choose certain pages or passages without looking at the book as a whole. So it can work for both sides.
Okay, awesome. So we've talked about local law and state law. Where is the Supreme Court in this? What do they say in regard to book challenges, either in schools, libraries, or in general?
So again, there was a ruling, I think the case started in 1977, but the ruling actually came out in 1982 in the state of New York. That was Pico versus the Island District School. And it was decided that school officials may not remove books from a school library simply because they dislike the ideas. They also recognize that local school boards have a lot of control and power about what happens within the school district. But again, you can't take something out of the school library just because you disagree with what is written in it. Right. Most school libraries and districts and public libraries have a policy in place that you have to go through in order to be able to challenge a book and or get it removed. And I think most parents especially, they come from a place of care and concern. Sure. And it's usually these soft challenges that may not ever get reported that are telling. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you're reading with your 5-year-old and it's a picture book and suddenly there's LGBTQ content, for example, that you're not comfortable with. Instead of, going through the process of filling out a form and going to the, library board meeting, you just simply pull a librarian aside and say, this book, it's got some stuff in here that I don't think kids should read or know about. So can we just put it in the adult section? Or can you put it behind the desk so that kids have to ask permission in order to read those things? It's still censorship, and it's still...
and you refer to that as a soft challenge.
Yes, because the patron or the parent didn't go through the process. Now, again, I would take that opportunity as a librarian to sit down with that person and say, hey, let's talk about it. Yeah. Most of the time, people just want to be heard, and I think that's really important. And again, it allows us to have a conversation about what libraries are for, what our role is as a public librarian, and what their role is as a parent, as far as access to materials. Because for every parent that is involved in reading with their child, there's an equal, if not more, number of parents who aren't. And that could be because, well, there's a million reasons why. Right. But if you're a teen and you know that your parents are not okay with you being gay or trans, you don't have an outlet to talk about that with your parents, but you might have an outlet to read about other people in a book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Just the fact that books exist for people to be seen is great. And also on the flip side, books exist for people to learn some empathy with people who are not like themselves. So I think that's an even greater risk, is if we take those books away and nobody has access to them, we're not letting kids be able to experience that empathy for somebody who is unlike them. And then we're also not giving kids who need that as a lifeline an experience of like, oh, there's somebody else out there like me.
Yeah. I love what you said just then about books are for people to be seen. And with the rise of these challenges, how extensive is the list for challenged and banned books? And what are some of the typical reasons why books make this list?
So the American Library Association has lists that they put out every year of the most challenged books of the past year. They also have top 10 lists of like books through the decades. And there's always a consistent theme. Sometimes with the younger kids, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, I don't think that one's been challenged. Captain Underpants.
Yes.
That one gets challenged a lot because it's like, bathroom humor and kids misbehaving.
And that collection's been around a long time because my son is 15 and he read that collection in like third or second grade. And he's a freshman in high school now.
Yeah. So that, and actually books have been challenged since the beginning of books being in existence or writing being in existence. Most of what we see are books that have characters of color, and LGBTQ, and profanity. Those seem to be the big triggers for people. There is a Texas representative. His last name is Krause. He recently created a list of 850 titles that he wanted to look at as far as content goes. The majority of those books are either about people of color, written by people of color, anything having to do with LGBTQ, social justice issues. I'm not sure where he's going with that, but
sure.
850 is a lot of books.
That is. And especially if it's encompassing certain minorities of people,
Yes.
People of color, and people along the LGBTQIA
Yes.
lines.
Yes. So,
So kind of the writings on the wall when you review these lists, especially an extensive list like that. Okay, understood. What are some of the more challenged books that continually are coming up for review, and why are these titles consistently on the chopping block? I know we just mentioned Captain Underpants.
yes.
And I, being a Toni Morrison fan, I think at least 8 of her titles have made the list. And we're talking about 2 very different genres of books. So tell me more titles that are continually showing up on these banned and challenged lists.
Yes. So I like when there are like the classics. So To Kill a Mockingbird is often on the list of Mice and Men. To Kill a Mockingbird is interesting because sometimes the challenge is that there's the use of the N-word in that book, but also there was recently a case where a district voted to stop teaching that text to their 9th graders, and that is because the text is old and there are more nuanced discussions of racism that can be had in more contemporary books that kind of reflect a shift in thinking for a lot of the culture. And so something like that is different. That is not censorship. That is a educational decision to remove something and update it. So it's like a curriculum issue.
Okay.
And, in that case, that's absolutely like, yes, you should be teaching, from the best texts that you can get a hold of. You don't always have to teach the same old. Huckleberry Finn, that's on there a lot. Again, it's the N-word is on a lot of the pages in that book. So that gets challenged because, we don't need to necessarily see or read that in certain contexts. Now, those books can still be on approved reading lists, but they may not necessarily be taught in the classroom. And that's okay. Like you would have a choice whether or not to read that book, or you could read, these 10 other books. So the hot book that, or the hot 3 books, I guess, that are kind of coming up right now is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson is a book about his personal experience growing up as a Black queer boy and then into his young adulthood. And in the beginning of that book, he has a wonderful author's note, and kind of like, this book talks about racism and homophobia and sexual assault, and kind of lays out what is in that book. So right there, like, if you know yourself and you're not interested in that, or you know that you might be triggered by that, or if you're a parent and you don't want your child knowing about those things, he lays it all out there, so you don't have to read that book.
Right.
But if you're somebody who is, interested in that, then you know what to expect. But that one comes up a lot because there are some passages in there that are, I don't want to say graphic, but they are also explicit, but it's his experience. And
Right.
if you take it out of context, it can seem shocking. But when you read the book as a whole, you come to understand that, like, that was his experience.
Sure.
And by trying to take away that book, it's like people are trying to take away that experience and basically say that those people don't exist.
Yeah.
Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evanson is another book that deals with homosexuality and also poverty, and the author's firsthand experience with that. It's not a nonfiction book, but it draws on his real life experiences, and there's sentiments that people think are anti-American, and again, I think it's a lot of homophobia and just anti-poverty thinking that people have a problem with. Genderqueer is another book by Maya Kobabe, and that is this person's experience through a comic format that of their growing up and realizing that they are asexual and also non-binary. Those are hard concepts to grapple with as a person if you are going through them.
Sure.
It's also hard concepts to deal with as a parent if that is your child. And I understand why some people and concerned citizens might be upset about those issues being brought to the front, but that's the human experience, and it's not all pretty.
Yeah, exactly. It's just it's about appreciating and valuing an experience that looks different from your own. Absolutely. My last question for you is, this is something that we will hear from the sides who are supporting book bans and challenges. Shouldn't it be a parent's right to decide what their child is being exposed to? At the end of the day, what is the danger of selecting some books to be removed from schools?
It's absolutely 100% a parent's right to decide what's right for their child. Again, I make decisions what I think is right for my child. I do not make decisions about what is right for your child.
Correct.
Because they may not be the same, and that's okay. It's the parent's job to pay attention. It is not the parent's job to pay attention for everybody else, because that's not fair. And also my morals and my values may not align with my neighbors, and that's okay. That's what makes America great. The important thing is to have the conversation about why. It's like if you fight with your partner about the dishes, it's never about the dishes, right? It's always something underlying that comes out as, why didn't you do the dishes? And I think it's like this with a lot of issues. It's important to have the conversation. The danger in taking items out of a school library or out of a public library is that you may be taking away a child or a teen's lifeline. And by them not seeing themselves reflected in the society, that pretty much erases them as a person. And, teen suicide rates, especially among people of color, men of color, and those in the LGBTQ community are much higher proportionately when you look at the statistics. And, some of the books that have been challenged, All Boys Aren't Blue, for example, teens are really active and they push back, and the number of teens that come forward and say, I need this book because I don't see myself in all the other items that I may have access to in the school library.
Sure.
And this one book saved my life.
Yeah.
You know, and I just, as a parent, I can't imagine alienating a child so much that they can't find themselves in a book. So it's great that we have all of these authors that are willing to speak their truths. Mm-hmm. And, you know, also it gives me an insight into things that I have not experienced.
Yes.
You know, poverty and racism and, you know, there's a lot that I haven't had to deal with, and reading other people's stories makes me a better person because I can put myself in their shoes. Yeah. And if I didn't have the option to do that by reading in a book, like what kind of a person would that make me?
Exactly.
So,
absolutely. I think that's a great note to end. Thank you so much, Erin, for joining us and sharing your expertise on these current book banning and book challenges that are happening. I'm Kellee Forkenbrock with North Liberty Library. Again, this is Erin Silva, our Youth and Teen Services Librarian. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Kellee.